And now part two to Bakeries and Awards.
That's where serendipity comes in the world of creation. I think he got an award for that.
And back full circle. What was the award he got?
A pile of bricks.
Oh.
Well, bricks were pretty valuable, in those days. I mean, you can't just go buy bricks at the hardware store. And then they got his slaves to build him a baker's oven. They're always working on new military dough weapons. There was, when they would encircle an enemy, and the enemy's getting really hungry, and then they start lobbing these loaves of bread at the enemy.
Right.
And the loaves are designed to give them horrible gas.
Bread was flat, and they would put yeast in the bread just before they launched it. The guys would eat it because they were hungry, and then the loaves would rise in their stomach, and they became bloated.
And then, of course, at night, they build a fire, and all this methane gas is being released. Creates these raging infernos, and there's exploding enemies everywhere. It was actually quite horrible. Human beings exploding.
The next day, there'd be thousands of bodies just littering the battlefield.
People don't realize that this was all a secret dough recipe weapon. It was used by Funganitus funginitus, or his nickname was just Yeast.
Well, don't forget about Homer.
Oh, yeah, Homer.
Well, you know why they called him Homer? Because, he was a big sports fan, but he only rooted for the home team. He would play-by-play for all the sports, but he was always rooting for the home team. He was very biased. That's why they called him Homer.
Well, that makes sense.
He left sports broadcasting and became a writer.
Little known, his third cousin, who wrote the Iliad, home recipes for a military yeast warfare.
That book spread like wildfire, and once that book got out, everybody was on equal terms. So then they had to sign anti-yeast treaties.
It was like the arms treaties that they had nowadays with nuclear arms.
Yeah.
That gets into the population spread supply, and it could just decimate with methane gas problems and bloating.
Now, what about Hippocrates? Didn't he have a role in this?
He was one of the guys always on the sidelines, trying to figure out a way how he could make his little statement in the history. I think he invented what the Brits call the jam butty.
The jam butty?
It was a sandwich, but it wasn't a sandwich. We'd take a loaf of bread, and then he'd cut a hole in it and tried to put jam into the hole, but he couldn't figure out what to hold the jam in.
He became despondent.
Yeah, he became despondent. And he was actually the laughingstock of Athens, because what's more ridiculous? It's like trying to fill a bucket with water, but it has no bottom.
No bottom at all.
He got it all wrong. Other people would make bread without crusts. He made crusts without bread.
Try to fill the inside with some kind of thing. Now, I heard that he was so despondent, and he left that field, and he became a zookeeper. And that's where he got the name Hippo.
Hippo.
Didn't he make containers for hippopotamuses? Hippocrates.
Hippocrates.
Yeah, isn't that where his name comes from?
He made crates for hippos, but he said that he was a zookeeper, but this wasn't really zookeeping. This was just keeping animals in crates, and so a hippocrate became associated with someone who says one thing but does another.
He accuses people of things he's guilty of.
Yeah.
Because back then, people involved in wrangling animals, they were the ones that tended to lie about it. That's where that phrase comes from.
Yeah, and he got an award for inventing something that people found annoying.
What was the name of the award?
Oh, it was the Grand Sphincter.
The Grand Sphincter? Well, they loved anatomy.
Yeah.
Sphincter is just a circular muscle. The most commonly known sphincter is your anus. He became associated with proctology because of that.
Figured, well, if they're going to call me the Grand Sphincter, then I should take advantage of it. And he said, well, I got an award for it, so I'm an expert at it. And if you're having any problems, I just know everything there is to know about them.
Well, people would come to him for advice, and they'd say, I'd like to know a little more about sphincters.
He considered himself a bit of an artist. And so he would have people pose for him, and he would draw their sphincters. And then he would have contests to see if people of the towns could guess their own sphincter. It's
like baby photos. You work in an office, everybody brings in their baby photos, you mix them up, and you try to match them up.
That's exactly it. That was a big festivity. People got quite excited and came from all around just to participate in the Great Sphincter guessing game. And there'd be a award, of course. The person who did win and guessed the right sphincter would often be stuck in a big ball of dough and rolled down the hill, which was considered the highest of compliments because they were using a big ball of dough just for amusement's sake.
Like the Greeks, this is not well known, they're famous for their busts of various Greeks. But they also made busts, well, I guess it wouldn't be called busts, but they also made models of famous Greek sphincters.
There was the Great Sphincter Temple where people would go and worship the sphincter god because they said, hey, if your sphincter's not in agreement with the rest of the things, you can forget about having a happy day.
Right. Well, that was kind of like these Greek theories on health, like before humors. One of their theories was if your sphincters is out of balance, then you'll be out of balance.
Words go all the way back to Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. which is even further back than the Greeks.
What were some of the awards of Neanderthals?
There is an interpretation of, in the caves, they found these cave drawings, and that it looks like there's a Neanderthal throwing a Homo sapien.
Oh, right. They had their Olympics as well.
They did, yeah. And usually it involved a lot of throwing of things. And Neanderthals were quite impressed if one could capture a Homo sapien and toss him further than anyone else. That individual would be quite revered. And because they didn't really like Homo sapiens too much.
Well, who did?
Yeah,
No one did.
no one.
Everybody hated the Homo sapiens.
The Homo sapiens hated each other.
They were like the New York Yankees. Everybody hates them.
I mean, the Homo sapiens are always trying to take over everybody's cave. They can't stay in their own cave. Oh, they got to have everybody else's cave.
And then they ignore problems back home in their own caves.
That's right, yeah. What was the word? That was like...
That was a misfit award. Or was it a more complicated name than that?
In Neanderthal, it's hard to say because we don't know what their language was, but they picture it, they show presenting one Neanderthal to another a necklace of Homo sapien toes.
So there's no sphincters involved.
I don't think Neanderthals knew that they had a sphincter. They weren't that medically advanced.
You could never see your own sphincter unless you had a mirror.
You'd have to go get in a highly reflective pond of water.
Whereas the Greeks had mirrors, so they were able to see their own sphincters.
The Greeks were always on top of those sort of things.
I heard that the study of sphincters made its way to the ancient Egyptians, but it got bastardized a little bit, so it was no longer sphinxter, it was just sphinx.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing. The Egyptians adopted this from ancient clay tablets that they found in Mesopotamia. And then they thought, sphinx, that makes sense. And so they put a person's head on the body of a lion because that's pretty much what they did when they couldn't understand something. They said, well, it must mean an animal with a human head.
A human head, yeah.
And the pyramids, people, little do they know that those are big monuments to the art and science of proctology. They're pointy.
How do you get inside someone? You need something pointed.
It was seen as a guide to good health, was to sit on a point for a while. If you could do that, you would strengthen your sphincter muscles. And it was also a competition. It'd be an award for who could sit on a little pointy pyramid.
The longest.
With their bare ass, the longest. Oh, boy.
One of the pharaohs, the Pharaoh Bum Bum.
Oh, yes, Pharaoh Bum Bum. Now, Bum Bum was an acronym for Bottom Under Maintenance Before Undue Mishaps. He was able to sit on a point for 24 hours, and he was quite revered and popular, but he was unhappy, though, because it did cause him some discomfort.
He became despondent after that.
He was found wandering in the desert, trying to avoid anything that had any kind of point on it, because he was traumatized.
Anything that was longer than it was wide caused him to shake. If something was wider than it was long, that would be okay. He liked things that their width was more than their length. If you take a ruler and put it on its side, then the width is no longer than the length. He'd be okay with the ruler on its side.
And he got into furniture design, and he invented the first toilet.
Well, toilets, that's why they're round. They should have been square. Every engineering principle suggests they should be rectangular. He made them round.
Yeah, he made them round. He got an award for that.
It was the Kaibo Award.
Yeah, the Kaibo Award and also the Camel Face Award. They thought camels had handsome faces, and it was a compliment.
And sphincters.
Yeah, camel faces and sphincters were pretty much on par with each other.
If you could get a hold of a camel sphincter, you were revered in the village.
Well, it's hard to get a hold of.
They don't like it.
Well, no, they don't like it at all, and it's pretty hard to keep holding on to a camel sphincter as it tries to shake you off. That was a lot worse than like the rodeos with some cowboy trying to ride on the back of some crazy bull. Well, try seeing the first rodeos in Egypt when you've got some Egyptian trying to hold on to the sphincter of a camel.
There's no barbs there, so you can't keep your hand on the inside. If they have barbs, you might be able to get your hand in and be able to stick in. Those rodeos they had, yeah.
Those were one of the first rodeos. It was quite popular. I think you got an award if you could hang on for more than 10 seconds. So what other times was there?
Well, the Civil War. There were some awards in the Civil War.
You get an award if you could survive and be able to have a decent lunch. The Middle Ages of people would give themselves an award for surviving anything. Plague, the latest angry lord.
For the latest invasion.
It's just a way to keep your spirits up. Give someone an award and they feel better.
But what about the Romans? They were pretty big on the war.
Like who can take over the most land in the shortest time possible award. Caesar was always handing out awards for that. And how many Huns can you fit into a wagon?
The Huns on a stick stacked like rotisserie chicken. Award?
They said, what are we doing this with Huns for? Let's try it with a chicken.
That was the invention of chicken as a food.
They never came up with the idea of a rotisserie. They put it in a fire and they cooked it on one side.
Now, what about Hannibal, guy across the mountains with the elephants?
He got an award for being a big pain in the ass, because why did he have to go over the mountains? You think you could have come up with a better route.
Why was he taking elephants? Almost all of them died.
And people liked elephants.
He didn't want him to go through that perilous journey.
He took everybody else's elephants. He didn't use his own. It's like, oh, I just got to use your car. And then you go take it through some swamp or some horrendous territory and then show up and say, well, sorry about that about your car, but got left out on the tundra.
Of course, it was several years later because the trip, several years. You'd be waiting for your elephant. Be back in a couple of days. 4 years later, sorry about that, your elephant's dead. What are you going to do?
Be so pissed off. And then Hannibal said, well, come on, relax. I'll give you an award. He thought everyone would be placated by an award. The award would always be just happen to have on hand. The guy said, what award? What kind of an award? He said, well, I don't know. Hey, you, give this guy your tunic. Then the other guy's pissed off because he's naked.
We have concluded our broadcast schedule for today. Good night.